All Things Alice. This podcast will explore the cultural phenomenon of Alice in Wonderland as artistic landmark and global symbol of inspiration and imagination. I'm your host, Frank Beddor, the author of the Looking Glass Wars trilogy. Let's explore, what is it about Alice? Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Today I have a really good friend of mine, somebody I've known for many decades. I won't say how many decades, but a lot of decades. His name's Ken Friedman. He's a terrific screenwriter. He's written on some really huge blockbusters, The Fugitive with Harrison Ford, Cadillac Man with Robin Williams, Johnny Handsome with Mickey Rourke. He's also a professor of television and screenwriting at NYU. He's a lover of skiing, which is how we met. And we're here to talk about all things Alice, which means we're going to talk about the Looking Glass Wars and his advice on how to adapt my novels into film or television. And we're going to talk about Hollywood and his experiences in the business. So let's tumble down the rabbit hole and start chatting with my good friend, Ken Friedman. Hey man, welcome to the show. I feel very comfortable with you. We met years ago when I was living with Peter Markle, the director of the masterpiece Hot Dog the Movie. Peter directed the film. I did the ski stunts, and turns out that he's also from Minnesota, and we moved in together in an apartment or a duplex on Wooster Street, and you came walking in the door. And what I remember the most vividly about meeting you that first day is how you completely ghosted me. Walked right past me, sat down with Peter, started talking about the film you two were co-writing, Youngblood. And I was a kid from Minnesota, and I thought that was incredibly rude. And I stepped out, gave you your space, but then met you a couple years later skiing at Snowbird, and we really connected because you had fallen in love with skiing, and I was up there doing stunts for Better Off Dead with John Cusack. And as I remember, we went to dinner, and I think I proposed, hey, I can make you a better skier if you can teach me how to be a screenwriter. And that was, as far as I recall, the birth of a long-term relationship. So what do you recall about one?
Completely different story. I remember going to Peter's to work on the script for Youngblood. Mm-hmm. By that time, I was already enthralled with skiing. And you showed up, I think, after me. And I was working on the computer, and we were doing some editing with Peter. So you were just an interloper. I probably had somewhere else I wanted to be other than working with Peter. And then you further delayed things until I was informed that you were a champion skier.
Right.
And then I went, oh. And I think at that point I had decided that I'm going to get to know you better. And what I have to offer with you, with Michael Lerner, with some other well-known screenwriters and producers now, I knew a few things. Didn't know how to ski as good as you, but at that stage, I knew how to write and develop a movie story.
Right.
And so I think within 20 minutes of you coming in to the house and leaving, I had a completely different impression of me. But I decided I'd get to know this guy better. But, in your world, where I don't know anything and wasn't really that good a skier at the time, I could see what was in it for me.
What was it about skiing, before we jump into writing, that was so attractive to you? Because you did start late in life, as I remember.
I had an uncle, Gerhard, German. I would go up and ski with him in high school, but it was always during winter vacation and it was raining. And so, but I remember liking it. When I went out to LA for about 10 years, I was a prodigious writer, but a prodigious partier too. And weekends got to be very debilitating, right, and expensive. And I said, for the money I pay partying for Friday, Saturday night, I can fly to Snowbird and learn to ski and remain entirely sober. It was better, more fun than hanging in Hollywood.
It was part of a sort of a program, an athletic program, finding something to replace, the partying or the drinking, and the athleticism and being in the mountains and nature, and were all of those
The
part of
partying
it?
didn't get in the way of my playing tennis, playing golf,
I see.
playing racquetball
Okay. Oh, that's right. You used to play racquetball. I remember we did that a few
at a
times.
pretty high level.
Yes, you were really good at that.
But it was wearing on me. And, it was a lot more fun. It was a lot healthier. My girlfriend at the time was a skier. You remember Sally?
Of course.
And so it was healthful and it was fun. And, I remember being with you on some of these ski trips to Park City.
At Sundance Film Festival.
Yeah, before the festival was, when it was a ski festival.
That was the most fun. The year of Sex, Lies, and Videotape. I think it was 1989. That was the highlight where everybody would come out skiing. We would ski with like 30 people that were part of the industry.
I mean, and that was a great time. But before Sex, Lies, and Videotape, our film, Made in USA, played at Sundance.
Oh, it did. Oh, I had forgotten
In fact,
about
it was closing night film.
Oh, bravo.
Special
right.
screening.
Right.
And unfortunately, your 10-minute introductory scene didn't make the movie.
Yeah.
Not my fault, by the way.
Well, let's just, I'm just going to clue the audience in about this film because it was your first directing job. So at the time, I was an aspiring actor, as you recall, and you had written and directed this movie. We're going to direct this movie. My friend Nancy was the assistant to your girlfriend. Sally was the casting director, right? And so you guys all asked me to come in and read for this small part. It was the first 10 minutes of the film, but there was not that much dialogue. And the way that you wrote the script was really unique because in the description of what was happening, you wrote it in first person. And it was the most lively script because all of the dialogue was from the character's point of view. So I decided to read that description as the character, even though, because there was only a couple of lines, and they were all reactive lines, for getting chased in the car and saying something to my girlfriend, and there was not that much. And when I came into the audition, I asked if it was okay, and you lit up. I remember you saying, yeah, no problem. The casting director, Nancy, and your girlfriend, Sally, said no problem, but Chuck Roven, the producer, he was like, wait a minute, I don't want to sit through a whole long thing. But for whatever reason, he let me do it. And I made a loud scream and I jumped into it and I just did this thing which went on for like 5 minutes and you were beaming the whole time. And I walked out and the room was filled with actors and they were all so confused because they heard all of this dialogue going on and they were like, what part did he read for? And I ended up doing the movie with you and getting cut out. But it was a super fun experience.
Probably a good thing. Yeah, there was, the film had an interesting history.
Well, tell us the premise of the film, because the premise of the film feels quite contemporary.
Before I wrote the film, I was on an airplane from Los Angeles to New York. I went back and forth a lot. I did a lot of writing, working with different producers and directors, some in New York, some in LA. And I was reading an article in Newsweek magazine about a place called Centralia, Pennsylvania. True story. And there was a coal fire under the town. And the description in this article said, "This is the roads, the streets glowed red at night." Mm-hmm. And I said, I got to see this place. Sounds like hell on earth. I got to go. So I rented a car in New York and drove to Centralia, about 2.5 hours from New York. And sure enough, not only were there red spots on the road and the cemetery was fumes rising and houses that caved in. It was really interesting. Apparently, the town, there were like dozens and dozens, hundreds of these small coal mining towns that were established in the early 19th century. And the people lived on top of the mines, and the workers would go down and then go into the tunnels. And it was deep mining coal. And during World War II, the need for coal was great, and the restrictions on mining was so expensive that they began using cheaper coal in New Mexico and Arizona, and these towns died. On Easter 1981 or so, a fire broke out in the town dump. There was no real urgency. One out of every 3 houses was already unoccupied. There didn't seem any urgency to put out the fire. They waited a day. For 2 years, the fire burned down, found a seam of coal near the surface, and charred its way down. So eventually, the charring down of the coal fire found the open tunnels full of oxygen and exploded into fire. And there were miles and miles, 1,000, 2,000 feet below the town, that was now cooking like a barbecue. And that's where the fumes came from, and that's where fire sometimes found its way up to the surface. And it really was hell on earth.
Hell on Earth, and also a preview of what we're experiencing now with climate change in this little area and this niche city.
It was like that.
Yeah.
And I wondered when I went there, what happens to people who grew up in this town? No jobs. And I began to think of the social contract. You know, that thing that we all signed up to, that if we don't run traffic lights, we don't beat up people without reason, we follow the rules and follow the law. Society's part is to give you a house, a home, a wife, 2 children, a picket fence, and a dirt bike to play with on the weekends. But these people didn't get their end of the social contract. So they grew up sociopathic. So I wanted to take these guys, 2 guys from this town who were 18, and send them across country. Wherever they would go would be another environmental disaster and another group of people not offered the social contract. So I came up with the idea to do a road picture across the country. Everywhere they go, the 2 leads, Chris Penn and Adrian Pasdar, they would run into another environmental disaster.
What were some of the other ones that
Dioxin spill in Times Beach, Missouri, radiation from mining of uranium on the Indian reservation in New Mexico. Everywhere you went, they would run into. And it was my idea that if I'm going to shoot this, I want to, not a documentary, but I wanted to document. So part of the concept is that we would shoot in all these locations that were damaged environmentally. We had hazmat suits. We had pregnant people who couldn't be on the set, but we really went in there and shot. And Times Beach, we couldn't even take our own vehicles in there. We had to use the special vehicles that they had for a couple of families that totally refused to move. The world's crazy. And so they visit all these locations, basically trying to get laid. You know, that's the only thing in front of them. Their plans to go to California, fuck a couple of surfer girls, and I don't know what after that.
Well, wasn't that my character? I was of that town in Pennsylvania, and I was picking up my girlfriend in I think I was a Trans Am or something.
Porsche.
No, it wasn't a Porsche. No, it wasn't a Porsche. No, it was an American car. It was definitely either a Trans Am.
Oh, but maybe there was something different in the script than with the movie.
Oh, you had a Porsche.
924.
Yeah, no, it wasn't a Porsche. It was a Trans Am.
Anyway. Very concerned.
Yeah. Well, I wanted my character to be perfect. But the funny story that I recall is that the girl was quite attractive. That was my girlfriend. And you wanted me to pull over.
I believe she was Jane Fonda's niece.
What?
Or Peter Fonda's niece.
Okay, so you're remembering a lot more details than I am, but I can recall this story. So I pull over. We're in the front seat of the Trans Am, and you have the camera outside on the windshield, and then you pull back to reveal us making out, but then this desolate road, and I
The
don't
smoke and
the
steam.
smoke and the steam, and so you can see the fire of the road underneath us. So it's a really slow, long pullback shot, and the direction was, okay, you guys just make out until I say cut. I was like, I couldn't believe what a dream job this was, at least in the beginning. And so we did this first scene. We were making out, and it was great. And you said cut, and then there was some sort of technical issue because we did a couple more takes, and in the next take, she bites my lip kind of hard, and I went, hey, next time don't bite my lip so hard, okay? And then on the third take, you didn't say cut. So we're making out, and I'm looking over her shoulder going, come on, guys, this can't possibly still be going on. And you had forgotten to say cut. And then you came over for the next one. You said one more, and we were really making out heavy, and I hit the windshield wiper, and
I remember that.
It sprayed water everywhere, and everybody was screaming at me outside because I had to clean it up, and it was cold. And the girl had bit on my lip. It started bleeding, and I was like, "Listen, I am going to, I'm going to get really angry if I keep bleeding." So anyway, we ended up having a good time, but that was the end of.
Yeah, that was the first or second scene in the movie.
Yeah, it was like the second or third day or something. Yeah. And then Chris and Adrian, they stopped my car, and it was night shoots, right? And they were supposed to be really intimidating, and both of them were intimidating. They both had the smell of vodka on their mouth, and I was like, okay, we're really in character now. It was my it's my second experience, actually, my second job acting, and I just had a great time for those few days we were on the set. One, it's a really cool concept, and then you guys went on the road and shot the movie, and then what happened?
Well, to finish the story of the movie, along the way, they meet a girl from Times Beach, Missouri.
Oh, right.
Who had her whole family die of cancer, except her mother was dying of cancer. So she was not offered the interpersonal contract. Basically, if you're nice to somebody, you can even fall in love with them. You have an opportunity for that. But she didn't have that opportunity, so she was psychopathic.
And that was Laurie Singer.
That was Laurie. And she leads these guys onto greater and greater criminal activity, testing how far, making them kind of test themselves and see how far they were going to go.
Great concept.
Great concept. Really quite a good film. But I got into a major dispute with the financier, not the producer, with a guy named John Daly. And he had made the Oliver Stone film Platoon.
Platoon, right.
And he was pretty full of himself. So after going all the way cross country with this movie, and being pretty happy with it, it was very unusual because the film was shot in continuity.
Oh, that's the other thing you wanted to do. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we had some issues with Chris, who's terrific talent, who's gone now. But he was having a tough time personally during the making of the film. But because we were shooting in chronological order, we just could get up every morning, go to the next location, and make it up as we went along. Laurie and Adrian were great. So the film was almost finished. John Daly, the financier, had been out of the country. His father was dying in London. So he just was really hands-off on the film. And we were struck by the IA. We had a lot of problems because of Daly being struck. All his films were struck, and we had Curtis Clark, the great cameraman, and Jim Newport, the design, had a design on the pictures. worked despite the cross lines, as most of the people on the crew did. So we had trouble finishing it, but we did. And we had finished it. We were a day and a half from finishing the mix on the movie, and Daly came back to town. We showed him the movie. He said everything was great. A week later, he came back, but I have 10 notes that you have to change in the movie.
Oh, no.
Or I won't let you finish it.
Oh, great.
One of those 10 notes was cut the opening scene. Swear to God.
Oh, John, where are you today? I'm going to smack you, dude.
Just look down.
Just look down.
That was one of the 10 bits. I don't even know why. We fought for it, but and then
you didn't fight hard enough, Kenny. You did not
apparently.
fight hard enough.
In fact, I had to cut it out of the movie. We did the mix on it.
What?
I have the elements. I can blackmail you with that.
Yes, you could. I'd love to show my kids. Anyway, I digress.
So I did the 10 things, and they were all terrible. Then he said, "I've got 12 more." And at that point,
sabotaging the entire experience.
And at that point, I said no, and he fired me, and took the film to his dungeon and tortured it for the next 3-4 months.
Oh, I'm
inviting
so
me in every 2 weeks to look at the damage that he had done.
Torture porn.
I got a call from the lab, and they knew I was having recutting problems with the financier, and they said, we have 2 black stripes in the movie in your cut, before he got a hold of it. And, with the 10 changes, but not the 20, 30 changes. Mm-hmm. And you want to come over and get it. A black stripe is that they make a print of the film off the original negative without sound. And I said, sure, I'll come right over and get them, which I ran to Duarte, I think it was. And Daly was one of the most hated people in town, and stiff people all the time. So all the people at Duarte were doing anything to fuck with him. And so they gave me the film. And then out of my own pocket, directing's expensive. I went hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt finishing the film when he stepped away. But I had 2 versions, 2 cuts of the film. And I had a copy of the mix, except for a day and a half, when he had taken it away from me. So I paid to have that copy of the mix, to mix that reel and a half off the black stripe, and waited. And he kept torturing the film. And I didn't see that there was any good outcome to have. So I submitted the film to Ken.
Your version.
My version to Ken. And
what was the reception?
Well, before I went there, and John said, if you dared show this and that, I'll put you in jail. Which, I don't know that it would put me in jail, but, and I said, bring it on. Because I knew that would make my career forever. That would make me an icon.
Yeah, that's the kind of publicity you go for. Yeah, that could.
So I said, bring it on. So instead, he brought his version of the film, rented a private theater in Cannes in the market, and showed it as an alternative to what I was showing at the Grand Palais, director's fortnight closing night film.
Wow, this is quite the duel.
And I made the front page of the entertainment section of the Los Angeles Times with a picture of me.
Excellent.
And so it was screened it in Cannes. It was the first time I screened it in front of an audience, so I had no idea what to expect. They did a ceremony. I came in. They said a bunch of things in French I didn't understand. Showed the movie, standing ovation for 10 minutes. And I had my 15 minutes, and I was single at the time. Mm-hmm. And there were, as I remember, very appreciative French girls for the vacation that summer. I showed it. And I just took the film and went to Munich, went to
All the film
Zurich,
festivals.
toured all the film festivals, carried the film in my hands,
And that's what you showed at Sundance?
and we showed it at Sundance too.
Right. Was it the midnight showing? Did you say?
Midnight.
Yeah. And what was the response there?
It was great. It was great. I mean, the film it's very unusual because of some of the hardships that we had when we made it. But shooting it in continuity and shooting at the real locations is very powerful.
Yeah, it would have
And it's
felt
still
authentic.
it's still powerful.
Yeah.
And I about 5 years ago, I took Patty, my wife, to Centralia, and most of it had been torn down and smoothed over, but there were still parts of the road that were burning, that were too hot to drive on. And
Is the film available? Well, I guess your version of the film is not available
here's
anywhere.
news. My version of the film sits in a
Vault.
vault somewhere.
That's too bad.
There is his version, without my name as writer, but as director. His version of the film is out there, and it was available. It's been on TNT, and then bootleg versions began to appear. So I don't know quite how
Bootleg versions of yours or
of the film
of your film, your
of
version.
Made in USA. No, not my version.
Oh, his version.
Not his version.
Really?
Some people, because of going back and forth from the lab, somebody got a hold of the elements of the film.
Wow.
And at some point, maybe there were 3 black stripes. I don't know. There's a version on YouTube. If you work YouTube a little bit, the film is badly damaged in terms of the editing. In the first 15 minutes or so, it was mostly Daly's version. The one that plays on YouTube now, the last hour of the film is pretty intact. There are a couple of additions of things that Daly took out that they put back in, and there were a couple of things that had been changed. But I said the last hour of the hour and a half film it's close enough that I could get people to watch it. Of course, it's several generations from
Right.
the print, so it doesn't have the beauty of the road trip through Arizona, New Mexico, California.
I remember the cinematography was just absolutely stunning and was one of the main assets of the film.
The juxtaposition of the beauty of
the two.
America with
the destruction.
Yeah.
Such a great message, such a great film to film.
I looked at it
now.
Yeah, it stands up because just the only thing that makes it not quite current is that the cars are 30 years old.
Right. Hey, can we rewind for a second, and can you share how you got started in or inspired to write? Was it the writing of film that got you going, or did you write when you were a kid in prose, or what was the genesis of your writing career?
I was 11 years old. My father was a businessman but wanted to be a writer. My mother wanted a psychiatrist. Everybody in my family was psychiatrists. So even at 11 years old, I knew I was destined to go to med school, become a psychoanalyst, actually. And they got me I had cramps when I was writing with a pencil. I just hold it too tight. And so my parents got me a Smith Corona manual, not electric, manual typewriter. And I learned to type very quickly, and I was good at typing. Still am. So I began playing on the Smith Corona and tapped out stories. And, I don't know, for whatever reason, I was never shy about showing stuff, good or bad, or, and it's still that way. I don't.
That's a gift.
Criticism didn't bother me a whole lot. Yeah, which served me well later on,
especially in the movie business.
Yeah. And so I wrote these stories that are really quite good, some of them, and then my parents saw that the writing was a good thing. and they got me an electric Smith Corona clamshell typewriter, which made things even faster and better. And so I was in special English classes in high school, and I was studied English. But my mother and father wanted still writing. Writing. My mother's a German shrink. You know, writing's a good hobby, Kenny. So
That's
I
excellent
wrote
parenting.
this. Yeah. So I wrote those. I wrote stories. You know, went to college and
Where'd
had
you go to
no
college?
interest in. Well, I started out at Clark University
Okay.
and flunked out of there. Uh, got an A in going to the racetrack. I was big in gambling. My father was a bridge champion, and I learned to play bridge from my father really well. And hearts and pinochle. Bridge was like stealing money from people, you know. And poker was too.
Yeah.
You know, I wouldn't say I was a gambler and a pool player. Played a lot of pool. Well, I was not a gambler. I hated to lose. Yeah, so I left Clark and got drafted and would have been on my way to Vietnam, like Oliver. Began seeing a shrink. My parents weren't, going to allow me to be drafted no matter what. And but going to see a shrink and going through analysis when I was 19 years old put me in touch with, what do you like to do? I like to go to movies, and I like to write, and oh,
Click.
click, and
Light bulb moment.
so I was already going. I'd gone from Clark to Nassau Community College to Hunter College to Washington Square. I was now in NYU Washington Square, determined that with my academic career I was not going to be a psychoanalyst, a psychiatrist, doctor.
Too many vices.
I was like on my way to being a psychologist, I think. I said with my shrink, who they found for me, a guy named Fryman, terrific guy. And, he said, well, why don't you do what you love? You're only 19, 20 years old. So I stopped gambling. I told my dad I wanted to switch to the film school at NYU. Who knew there was even such a thing? That's the story. Oliver Stone, Jonathan Kaplan. There were all these misfits that ended up in NYU Film School with Scorsese as our teacher, one of our teachers. And that was the end of work.
Right.
I never worked again because I was only writing, directing.
You found something that you love that
and
is your job.
And I still feel the same way now, teaching it mostly.
Right.
Never consider it work. It's fun.
So what was it like at NYU with Oliver Stone and Scorsese as your teacher? And Jonathan Kaplan became a good friend of yours, as I remember.
Yeah. So, I'd seen a lot of movies. And let me do a shout out to Marty. But they were all Antonioni, Fellini, Truffaut, Chabrol, Godard. Once in a while a black and white English film from the early 60s, like The Sporting Life. And everything else that was coming out of Hollywood was dreck, was garbage, was not worth my time. Mm-hmm. And, Blow Up and Antonioni's film Blow Up and Godard's film Weekend. Mm-hmm. I saw them each about 30, 40 times.
Wow.
That was what I wanted to do. And Marty had a class, one of the first classes in Guyana. This was before he made Mean Streets. And he was picking up extra money teaching. Haig Manouchian, who ran the school, was also Marty's producer. So, at the time, he just looked at this little guy jumping up and down with more enthusiasm for movies than anybody I'd ever seen. And we had this class, and I didn't know what the class was. And we walked in, and he showed one great American genre film a week. The Big Heat, Sweet Smell of Success, Only Angels Have Wings, great Howard Hawks, John Ford, Hitchcock, all the great auteurs
And he's got a photographic memory for all things cinema, right?
Yeah.
So he can tell you shot by shot. That must have
Well,
been.
he showed the movie, and then we'd just go crazy and talk about it. But the thing that blew me away is, first of all, Truffaut didn't invent that. Godard didn't invent that shot, that juxtaposition of images. You know, they took it from Hitchcock, from Ford. So first of all, like, oh, you know, this is the Bible. They, you know, read the original. You don't have to read the interpretations. So secondly, these movies were incredibly political. You know, most of these guys have been real, Fritz Lang, and who had made Metropolis and made a lot of movies about the class struggle more overtly, could come to America and make them covertly. And, you know, and have these strong points of view about life and how society works. The Big Heat's an amazing example. So there was that you could really be political, and they were in English.
And you were, you know, in your 20s, and did you have something to say? Did you have find a strong voice when you saw these filmmakers? And
Yeah, it inspired me. I mean, the most inspiring moment was The Wild Bunch, which is
one of the great.
Which, you know,
Tarantino's favorite, I think.
Yeah, this was 1969. And I was in film school, and Marty had a class, and it showed one of these great films, but he couldn't stop talking. I just saw this Western, and there's a scene with a little bird, and then they go, and William Holden, who knew he could do this? And, you know, he went on for like 15, 20 minutes.
Wow.
So we were down at NYU. So class was over, we all pile into the 6th train, go uptown, and it was playing at the Cinema 1-2, now the 1-2-3, but then 1-2, still there, and went in to see it. And I was the original uncut version that was 2 hours and a half.
A short movie by today's standards.
Yeah. This had more content. And I remember going in there and sitting there and was just blown away. That changed my whole perception of the kind of stories I wanted to tell. Sat through the movie twice, didn't get out of the seat.
Wow.
You know, and
what were you thinking about telling, and how did it change it? So what was your mindset in terms of storytelling and the kinds of stories, and then how did that shift it to what?
Well, it's the character development. You know, that you could do things with character. And
in a genre piece.
I'm talking now.
Yeah.
You know, at the time I was like just super entertained.
Yeah.
And, you know, and trying to process what that was. But, you know, it wasn't the politics of the culture of that movie. It was the passion about that it was made. You know, somebody said back then that, you know, every movie is about a director trying to make a movie and overcoming obstacles to make that movie. And this one had such a love of cinema, such an embrace of characters, such chance taking, and fuck you, you know, that it, you know, mattered more than whether this was about Vietnam or something. You know, but Peckham was just about getting the movie made. You know, he wasn't trying to change the world.
No,
it was just, you know, the adversity to find meaning in the thing you do. That you didn't have to have now, like, what's your theme? You know, I work with a lot of students and a lot of people who've become very successful. And I'm not going to go and ask them what the theme is, unless they want to talk on that level. But it's your passion. It's your passion about what you're doing that will carry the day, and that your personality, your view, your worldview, your politics, your social activism. You know, all of that will be reflected in the movie if you trust your honesty and you trust your ability to do it. And, you know, I've worked on a lot of movies, some good, some not so good, you know, but the ones that I felt most passionate about and less technical about were the ones that actually, you know, made my career, continued my employment. And I think that's what I learned from the Wild Bunch and for these other great American cinema films.
I've always felt it, whether it's in filmmaking or writing novels, in writing a novel, it's the prose, but it's really the voice. It's what you have to say and the way you say
Yeah.
it. And everything else that you've experienced in your life comes through, all of your DNA. And I think, you don't really have to necessarily talk about and identify the themes, because those themes, those things that you're interested in, will come through the words you choose, the images you put up.
Yeah. No, when I read your books, I feel the passion for the story you're telling.
That passion is carried me through these 20 years, and the school events I do, and the audiences that I meet at Comic-Cons, and the writing, all that it takes to get a piece of art into the world, because it's more than just the putting it on the page. There's a whole lot of press in the flesh to get people, and then once it catches on, and once in my case, once they read the book and they interpret the book in the same way that I had it in my mind, or they watch the movie and that's what the director had in mind, or the filmmakers, that's a deeply powerful and satisfying experience to creating art. And I know that, because you and I have worked together, you've worked with me as a consultant on the Looking Glass Wars, and helped shape, the direction. Originally, we talked about it, as a movie, and what the structure, and what's the character have to say, what's the character's obstacles, what's the character's story.
Looking back on it, and it was fun to talk story with you and Elizabeth and
Liz Cavalier.
And some of the other people, but just talking story. And I was thinking about it on my way over here. Your inspiration, from my point of view, was to take a black and white story and colorize it. That Alice grew up in the Industrial Revolution in England, and that was the real world, with the political problems and good guys, bad guys, and that's a world created that's been created before in film that really is dark and gray and very class conscious.
Right. Commentary really on
and Lewis Carroll's world, but also Frank Beddor's world of Wonderland is a place in color, without industry, but not without struggle, not without competition, not without good guys and bad guys. The fluidity, of characters being able to move from one world to another, I think was what sets your books apart. And I know when we talked about the Hatter story and his fish out of water in trying to deal with the world of the 1800s.
Yeah, I mean, you had me really drill down on Hatter's 13 years in our world.
Yeah.
And where in the books I did basically a synopsis of those 13 years, because I was following it from Alice's point of view. And then the graphic novels expanded it. And then you asked me to expand it once again. And you asked me to do this in when I was putting the Bible together. And you might recall, I wrote, I think, a 5 or 6 page story that was an amalgamation of the books and the graphic novels to have in the Bible. And I made a few changes, and I said, nobody's ever going to read this because it's way too long. And you really appreciated the content and said it's going to serve you one day. In this case, we were talking about a movie. It's going to serve you one day. Now, it doesn't serve me in the sense of selling it, but it certainly serves me when I talk to other creatives and they want to have a quick overview that gives you a beginning, middle, and end without reading 15 books.
Yeah.
And I wrote it in prose style, and I gave each one of the characters, there are 5 or 6 pages, and I gave each one of those to you, and you read them very quickly and were enthusiastic and gave me great critiques on them, and they became basically the meat
Yeah, I
and
remember
potatoes,
that. Yeah.
right? And
Yeah. I mean, I still,
I still think it's true.
it's still in the teaching I do, and I've been
Right.
teaching grad film at NYU for 17 years now.
Right.
Character, character, character. A character, world, character, world, character, plot, way out there someplace. Don't worry about that now.
Yeah, and there were a few things that I was able to fill in that were very cinematic, and that I would change today. Of course, there's many things I would have changed in the book, but what's great is having another go at it because it's like, okay, I'm taking my work and now adapting it for, it's one thing if it's a movie, it's one thing if it's a TV show, and if it's a TV show, you have time. And that's what people tune in. They want to see the character struggles, the obstacles, the relationships.
The world gets them in
Yeah.
to it, and then
but the characters keep them coming back, and so I want to acknowledge and let you know how much I appreciated that feedback, because now I'm really proud of writing those stories. At the time, they were driving me crazy because I thought, no one's going to read these, no one's going to read it. I have a paragraph to get their attention or one line. So, hey, but let's just flip back to Marty, because you told me the story of one of the early scripts that you wrote, and I ended up working on it years later, tried to get it going for you, The Booster.
Yeah.
And you talked to Marty about that, and with a up-and-coming actor. Is that right?
Backstory. I was going to NYU and studying film, but I was spending my nights at Max's Kansas City with the Warhol people and the back room at Max's with all these incredible characters. I was, and I made a film called Showdown. It was an 8-minute Western, and it won the National Student Film Festival and played on Saturday Night Live when they used to have student films.
Wow. I love doing this podcast so much. And I mean, we're longtime friends, and I've learned a lot, and we're just getting going. That's amazing.
So anyway, that film played at Lincoln Center, played it around. It was one of the great shorts. And I can tell you the story in a minute.
Yeah, love to hear it.
Because of the Wild Bunch,
good. You put
I
it to
wanted
good
to make
use.
a Western, and I was fascinated. And at the time, we didn't have insurance companies and stuff like that. As a student, I could do anything. So I wanted to make a Western, a violent Western, as violent as I could possibly make it.
How old were you?
20.
Okay. Makes sense.
And maybe 19 or 20, I think. And it was just after the Wild Bunch came out. So I had the story about 2 gangs of cowboys in this town, 3 on each, 3 brothers and 3 brothers. And they're arguing, getting heated up about the girl, and one says, well, I robbed the bank for her, and the other guy, well, I shot the sheriff for her. And they just start going through the litany of crimes that they've made for this girl. And eventually, after 3 or 4 minutes of arguing about this, the weapons are drawn, and then the fight starts. And they blow the shit out of each other. I learned how to do all that special effects with squibs and condoms and stuff to blow blood all over the place. And I had guns and bombs and Gatling gun I managed to get from the prop house, and they just blow the hell out of each other. One guy's arm gets blown off, another guy's liver falls out from the stomach, another guy gets 20 shots like that.
Wow.
Nobody dies.
Oh.
They just keep going, and continuing to beat the shit out of each other. And finally the girl says, stop it, goddammit. I've been with every guy in town. I'm not worth fighting over. And they go, maybe. Guy picks up his arm, the guy takes his liver, stuffs it vest in the shirt, they get on the horses and they ride out of town.
Monty Python.
Yeah, I was probably influenced by them as well. Maybe it was earlier. So Marty was one of the judges, in the film. So I knew him from teaching, and after that, that film brought me into the attention of a lot of people. Howard Ziff, who you've met, friend from 50 years ago, and he showed up, and he was an ad man in a suit, pretty slick, and showed up at NYU and had seen my short at the festival and wanted to make somebody to write a movie about a character he knew. And that was Billy the K, the lead character of the Booster. The Booster is somebody who steals things in consignment. And this was back in the late 60s. So it was.
So if I want a Cartier watch, a particular watch, I tell him, Billy K, go get me this watch.
Yeah, he dealt mostly in clothes. So, he'd hang and go to parties, and he had dyed his hair pink. He was a weird, wild guy, and you'd meet him at the party, and they say, Frank, this is my friend Billy. Frank, what the fuck are you wearing? Did you get that out of your grandfather's closet? What are you gonna? Let me. You ought to be in Da Vinci, Givenchy or something. And I say, yeah. He says, but I can't afford at the time $1,000 suit. And he'd say, well, what if I get you? And he'd do the whole tailoring thing and say, okay, 32 waist, 37 inseamed, and he'd say, $1,000 off the rack. I'll get it for you for $200. And you'd say, right size? He says, yeah. Could just meet me here tomorrow night. And then he'd go to Givenchy or any one of the boutiques or Bloomingdale's or Saks, and he'd basically shoplift. He had a lot of different ways, but he'd steal the suit. A lot of times just run and gun, just grab it or go out before the security could stop him. He had various ways. And he'd show up the next night there was a number of salons. There was this tailor, true story, who ran a thing, and movie stars would hang out there. And because of my Warhol connections, I'd get there, and Howard was the purchaser, and then he'd come with the suit, and it was exactly what you ordered.
Wow. And he was the lead character for the Booster.
But what was fascinating to me is then Howard said, "Wait, watch this," and he'd say, Billy would say, "Where's my $200?" And he'd say, now that I look at this, maybe I didn't want it that badly. I don't think that's a good color, goes with my face. I know you went through a lot of trouble. I'll give you $100 for it. And he'd then say, $100, I could just put it in the back of my pants and sell it out of the trunk of my car on Orchard Street. Well, my friend, maybe that's what you should. Well, all right, 50, and you'd haggle them down.
So you haggle over a little bit of money,
and most of the people who were doing the haggling had no trouble spending the full amount of money. Could have bought everything retail. There was Shelley Winters. It was
just for the fun of it.
There were a lot of famous people who knew him. So, we wrote a movie about it. And I knew De Niro, just from hanging around NYU and Scorsese. So I was able to get the script to Bobby, and he read it, and he said he wants to do it. And we spent a couple of months learning how to shoplift, going to Bloomingdale's, doing all that.
Oh, you did that research.
Yeah.
You did some shoplifting.
And we had a financier that he brought to the table. And it's a true story. And we go up there, Howard, De Niro, and myself, and one of Marty's guys, to see his lawyer who was putting that as a question. And we go in there, and we were supposed to sign the check and begin pre-production. And the secretary's sitting there like pale white when we come in. And we said, where's Lou? And he said, well, he's in London. He went to London to live.
Oh, getting out of the country.
He just bailed on everything.
Oh.
So then De Niro said, I just finished this film with Marty. You mind if I show him the script, or you can show him the script? I think, would you step away and let Marty direct it? And I said, sure. I always feel, that I've wanted to direct certain movies, but I want to get movies made. So I said, sure. And we had a couple of meetings with Marty, and he was developing Taxi Driver at the same time.
So it didn't work out.
That happened. It got me out to L.A.
Right.
There was a guy, a producer named Jonathan Taplin, not Kaplan, but Taplin,
Mm-hmm.
who had produced, I think, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. And so then Marty, when I stepped away as director, he said, well, let me take this to Taplin. He might finance it. And he said, he'll fly you out here. We'll make some changes on the script. And I went out to L.A. That's how I got out to L.A. And stayed the first week in their offices, slept in the motels in the Burbank lot. And then he introduced me to Roger Corman.
And you did Roger Corman. You wrote for Roger, or?
So I came out, and Roger Corman had called me, and Marty had recommended Jonathan Kaplan and me. And he said, if you want comedy, you should get to Jonathan. If you want action, you should talk to Ken. And, Roger said, this is Roger Corman calling from Los Angeles. Would you like to come out to Los Angeles and make a movie? And I said, yeah. I can tell you a story about, so I packed up my girlfriend, my dad, get behind me, gave me the car, his old Pontiac.
To get you out here, obviously.
Yeah. And, Celia and I and the little bird and the cat all drove to L.A. And first night, and Jonathan had arranged for me to stay in a big house in Laurel Canyon with 7 or 8 other people. And I'd gotten I had no idea, I think this house belonged to Houdini at some point. And we had the apartment over the garage. Everybody else lived in the big house, but shared the kitchen. And I drove cross country. I got to Los Angeles at 11 o'clock at night, found my way somehow, I don't know, up to this house, found the garage, the beautiful apartment was spectacular. And they had a little dish out with joints in it. And, I'm thinking
that's sweet.
I'm thinking this is pretty good. And the next morning, I'm a little jet lagged. I wake up at 7:30 and I go to the kitchen to make myself a cup of coffee. And there's a woman there cooking eggs. And she was one of the most beautiful women. Well, it turns out to be classic, amazing beauty, L.A., Playboy Bunny, all of that. Her name was Michelle Swain. She's cooking eggs, butt naked.
Paradise.
And
Ken Friedman, 20 years old.
My girlfriend was in the room. I wasn't like, it was like, I must have gone through the rabbit hole. It was definitely Hotel California experience. This turned out to be a very bizarre and dark place.
Understood. Well, I'm going to jump to 4 of your movies that I'm really interested in hearing how they came about. White Line Fever was an early movie. I know you worked on The Fugitive with Harrison Ford, so I'm curious about that. Also, Cadillac Man with Robin Williams, who's amazing, who, by the way, at my wedding, because you were there, I quoted a couple of his lines from his other movie, Good Will Hunting.
Yeah.
So I'm a fan. And then I remember some crazy stories with Mickey Rourke in, what was the name?
Johnny Handsome.
Johnny Handsome. That's right, and Johnny Handsome. So writer's choice, where you want to start.
Well, I'll do chronologically. Well, following up on the story, when I went to work for Corman, but the film I wrote for him, which was really good, little action film, didn't get made. This is like Hollywood. He had raised money from Al Bell and a couple of other connected people in Detroit and Chicago to make a little step up from the Roger Corman films to Gene Corman films. Lovely, erudite, wonderful man, Gene was. And terrible producer. And I'm writing this script about gangs in L.A. And he's making the first of his 3 movies. And it was the never to be forgotten Darktown Strutters.
Never to be forgotten. Who could forget that?
This was in the middle of the black cinema, and,
Yeah.
But he managed to find some white redneck to direct this movie. I think it was with Pam Grier. And so the story, basically, as I remember it, is this gang of female black action heroes go up against this Colonel Sanders type who is poisoning the water supply with a chemical that makes all black men impotent.
Great.
Already.
What an inspiration.
Already. And it's a musical.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yes,
No. That's too much.
I might be wrong. I may have embellished the story over the years.
A few years later.
Anyway,
I get the picture.
It was a disaster. Lost all the money. Gene said, sorry now. When they pulled out, they said they were going to break my legs if I didn't give them the rest of their money back. But, I was 21, 22 years old, onward. And I drove back to New York. I had raised money. I found a guy who I wrote a Western inspired by the Wild Bunch. Really good script, too. And I was an investor who was going to put up $250,000 to make this Western period piece in Israel, and I could raise another 250 at the time by renouncing my U.S. citizenship and becoming an Israeli citizen, and then they would give me money towards this movie. There were a lot of other sketchy parts of this. We had gotten Richard Boone, famous, great, wonderful Western actor, horrible drunk who was going to kill me, So there was kind of push-pull on that. And I'd been driving back and forth cross country and, noticed that the best, cheapest places to eat is where the truck drivers
Truck stops.
Truck stops. And I got to know them all, and I'd sit there and talk to them and hear the stories and talk to Jonathan about it. And when we came
Jonathan
up,
Kaplan?
Yeah, who was, my partner and friend, and
Had he directed any Hollywood?
yeah, he did. He had directed in the same time I was there. He did 2, like 2-week shoot films, little naughty films for Roger. Night call nurses. They always come when you call. And did a couple of black action films. One with Jim Brown. May he rest in peace.
Yeah, rest in peace, bud.
And one with Isaac Hayes called Truck Turner. And so he was sought after by, the young Hollywood now. Because those films were good. He's a very talented director. And, we were best friends and roommates. So we developed the story together. And this was actually when I was on my way to New York. Gave it to our agent at the time, Harry Uffland, who represented Marty and De Niro and everybody out in New York, film school. And I drove to New York. I got to Kansas City, went to a phone booth. Jonathan had turned around, come home, 3 studios wanted.
We're talking about White Line Fever.
White Line Fever.
Yeah.
And we went back and we chose Columbia, and our production executive was Peter Guber. He was actually head of production, and he was, we were like 22, 23. He was 29, and he was the wonder kid. Hollywood at that time was in shock because the studio system had broken down, and they realized that the directors that they had on studio, all these old hacks from the 30s and 40s, probably racist, probably classless, you know, couldn't relate to the audience that went to Woodstock, protesting against the Vietnam
Right.
War and stuff. And so, Corman first and then other people said, we're going to hire these young people and let them go. Jonathan Demme, Coppola.
It was an amazing time,
Yeah.
going in from the 60s into the 70s
And
into the greatest
we
decade
didn't
of
give a
film.
shit.
Yeah.
We were working for a guy who's 29, Peter Guber. Great ideas.
Really?
Oh, he was the best executive I ever worked with. I've done 4 or 5 films with Peter. He until he got too big, he was a great producer. He had great ideas. He'd seen all the movies that we had seen. He was a film buff. He loved movies, and we could talk to him in the language of film. He had a lot to do with the success of the film. We didn't know what we were doing. I directed the second unit. Jonathan did the first unit. Co-wrote it, co-produced it.
How was it? How was it received?
It was a smash.
Oh, you're kidding!
Yeah, it was.
Tell me about that. I mean, those days.
Well, I'll come full circle here now. So Harry Uffland did a very good job in negotiating the contract, and I was going to produce it. Didn't know nothing about producing film. Guber calls us into his office, and he's got one of those buttons that just slams the door behind you, And he said, I'm going to tell you something right now, and you're going to have to answer me yes or no. I got a guy named John Kemeny. He's out of Canada. He's got like $1 million that he's going to invest in this film. He loves his script. Only thing is, he's got to be the producer. So, Ken, you're not the producer. I said, will I get paid what I was going to get paid before? And he said, yeah, I'll call Harry. I said, okay.
You didn't even know what a producer was. So,
and no, I didn't know what a producer was. I didn't know what a writer was either.
Yeah. But you'd made a bunch of movies, and that's what a producer does. I mean, they help get the movies made.
Well, you help,
even if you just hire a friend, you put the team together. That's what a producer does.
So we opened the movie, worked with Peter on it. I did the writing, and the film cost $1.4 million, and it made like 40-50 million.
Wow, that's
domestic,
a smash
domestic.
Hit.
40 times cost.
Wow.
And we made it 6 months after. You know the movie?
Yeah, sure.
That big crash at the end.
Uh-huh.
I remember coming out of the movie, and we went to the premieres, and we knew people liked the movie. And the movie's great. You could look at it now. But the publicist got on the phone. He says, "You won't believe this. That." He says there was it opened in Wyoming and playing at the One Cinema, and the movie was over. This guy takes his car and flies full speed into 7-Eleven. And I said,
inspiring people wherever you make movies, Ken.
Yeah. And so 4 months after the film opens, I get a check in the mail from Columbia Pictures. My share of profits, the only time I've ever had shared in profits, because of the deal that Guber made with this guy. And I had a check for $104,000.
Wow. That must have been a lot of money.
$1 million.
Yeah, $1 million, right.
Well, I'll tell you a story about that. So there's $1 million. So I, call up home, and my mother picks up the phone, and I say, guess what I'm holding in my hand? And she says, no, Kenny, I don't know. I don't want to play these games. What are you holding in your hand? I said, a check for $104,000 for that film we made that you didn't understand. And she says, my father didn't make that in a year,
Uh,
and she says, look, you did very good. I'm very proud of you. You did very good. Thanks, Mom. 3 days later, 2 days later, I got a phone call from my mother, and she says, your father and I were thinking, which is maybe my mother was thinking, my father was listening. My mother said, you could go back to medical school and be a psychoanalyst by the time you're 32. So no,
That's very funny. The whole thing when you're in your 20s, or actually any time with your parents, and when you've done something and you feel proud and you want them to be proud of it, it's exciting. I had a similar thing with There's Something About Mary, and we were driving to the premiere in Westwood, and we were in the limo. They had flown out for it, and my mom suddenly was very concerned. She said, somebody told me that this was considered a gross out comedy, and I really don't like gross out comedies. And I said, okay, Mom, yeah, people will think that maybe, but let's just go in and see the movie and tell me afterwards. And so we went in, and of course, it was completely packed. We had seats reserved for them. They were right in the middle. And then the movie comes on, and from beginning to end, everybody is roaring with laughter. There's 1,500 people. Bodies are going. People are slapping. It's the funniest thing ever. My mom can't believe it. She goes home to Minnesota. She invites her two friends to the Dock Theater, which seats about 30 people. She goes in with her two friends. There's nobody else in the theater. They start watching the movie, and nothing, crickets from her friends. It's nothing like Los Angeles. All they see is the gross out part of it. They don't get the film at all. And my mom shrinks into a small little being like, oh, you didn't like the movie. And she calls me, she goes, Justy and Jerry did not appreciate the humor in your movie. I go, Mom, do you remember the screening? And then I called her and said, Mom, the movie made $350 million and they just paid me a couple $1 million. And she was like, good for you, son.
Yeah. I mean, my mother saw Made in USA, and, she said, it was in the screening room in New York for about 50 people after Cannes. It's very interesting.
Well, yeah, when they say very interesting, love the music, you're in trouble.
Yeah, she's trying to think how somehow that's like a revealing of my character, like it's a dream.
That must have been hard to live with, the psychoanalyst as your mother.
So, upshot, Jonathan and I just
became hot stuff in town.
We became hot stuff, but we each had $104,000, and we decided, we put together a fund and opened a company called Ken Friedman Productions, and we each took, I don't know, 30, 40,000 of the money and invested it in this company because, we thought we were lucky that all the people we went to school with or the friends that we had made in LA who were trying to be writers and directors or actors, that we'd have a company that would support their dream projects. And
that's inspirational.
So we put I don't know,
you lose all the money?
Every penny. Nobody, not only that, nobody delivered.
No. Tragic.
Nobody, our friends.
None of them delivered. They got the money and didn't deliver.
Yeah.
So you went back to work.
We were patronizing, and they wanted to, it wasn't, it was needed. They took the money, but it wasn't appreciated. And nor did they want to take notes from us or, they just
wanted the cash to go do their thing. I mean, there's a reason there's a studio system in place. I mean, it's the checks and balances. And you had Peter Guber, and if you have a great executive, like a great editor, with my book, they make it better because they know the right questions. They demand they demand more from you. They expect that you can do better, but they're not patronizing, and they're your partner or they're inspirational. They're not, ripping you, tearing you down. They want to tear you apart so you can build yourself up stronger with your work. So
Yeah, I don't know if it's that altruistic. They want to.
well, not anymore.
I had
Certainly not
no.
anymore. It's not.
I had aside from John Daly, and at the time people thought, why aren't you more angry? And I said nobody would have made that movie. I mean, besides the stream of consciousness writing and then the original script, that there were no dialogue headings. It was just dialogue.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it was
there were
crazy.
things I did to create interest in the script.
I absolutely loved it, and the only script that I've ever read that was similar was Leon, which was the Luc Besson movie with Natalie Portman. The Professional. It was It was called Leon in the French version, but the script was very, very similar to the style that you. Yeah. And I was a script reader at the time, and they paid me $50 to. And I said, I want to. Can I option that? How can I get that script? I really wanted. I didn't think anybody would make that script. I thought it was amazing, and it was the same. He wrote it in exactly the same style you did, and it was so much fun to read. It was just great.
Yeah, I mean, it's still the game is get people to read.
Get people to read. That's a challenge. We'll talk about The Fugitive because that's one of my favorite movies. Loved Harrison Ford at the top of his game. I know you came in. I can't remember where you came in on top of.
There was a movie. There were a lot of stabs of it. It was a successful TV show. I had just come off of Johnny Handsome and Cadillac Man, so I had written 2 movies within 1 year that were major stars, major releases. And so I was hot. They were having trouble getting a script out of it. Walter Hill was directing it, and Alec Baldwin was starring in it.
Oh, Alec Baldwin.
They didn't have a script yet, but Alec had committed to do it. Walter was going to direct it. I had done Johnny Handsome with Walter, and Chuck was producer of Johnny Handsome, so he and Walter and I were kind of a team, and we came in it was a big budget film, and took over the writing, directing of it. So Walter, one of the greatest screenwriters in Hollywood history, and I can do shout outs to Walter.
Right.
I learned more from him about writing than anybody else. So we came in as a team. We had a little different take on the movie, but 23 minutes of the movie came out of that partnership. So we wrote 2 drafts. There were probably 3 or 4 writers who did drafts before us, and 3 or 4 writers who did drafts after us. Mm-hmm. But when we made it, 23 minutes remain in the movie from the Walter, Ken Friedman, Chuck Roven version. And it starts, this is an interesting story because it's how films get written. And I tell this story in my class. So we had a take, and we had meetings with the producer and Warner Brothers, and everything was good. Train crashes, he gets away. He's on the run. Tommy Lee Jones comes in as the cop, says he's been on the run for 6 minutes and 20 seconds. He can't go more than a mile in this direction, put out a circle. So he comes in and does that. Harrison Ford manages to escape. He's a doctor, goes into a clinic, sutures his own wound from the racetrack, continues his escape. Gerard, played by Tommy Lee Jones, goes after him. They have a couple of close calls. Then you find out they've caught the fugitive, but the fugitive is caught as somebody else who escaped from the train, and he almost makes his way, but they find him again, and he's at Niagara Falls, and he's going to jump in the falls, and Harrison Ford says, I didn't do it, and Tommy Lee Jones says, I don't care. And So that whole section of the movie, we wrote. I wrote a lot of that dialogue and came up with bits. And then the cops reconnoiter and how they're going to find him. And that's where we departed ways. You know, we were lovers of the TV show. We did not make it a revenge picture. The big problem with the film, and I'm wrong on this, but I felt, how can this rich, powerful Harrison Ford look-like handsome guy allow himself to be found guilty for a crime he didn't commit? You know, he would have the best lawyers. He would, you know. So why didn't he put up any defense? Well, because in the TV show, which dealt with the same problem, he had a shitty relationship with his wife. She was an alcoholic. He'd work overtime just to get away from her. So one night he stays at the hospital when he doesn't have to, and at that night she's home intrusion, and with a one-armed man, and kills his wife, and he's feeling guilty. He feels that he needs to pay for the crime. So he chooses not to defend himself. So this is the story as we saw it, and we worked out it with Alec and Walter and Chuck, and we talked it through, and we went that way, and they were thrilled with the first. They didn't mind that change in character. And then in the second half of the movie, you know, in the TV show, he wanders Christ-like across America, saving women in bad relationships from being abused, pretty much every other show anyway. And he's really good looking, but he can't stay and fulfill these women's, you know, he moves on. So we then went and put a kind of a TV episode in the middle of the movie, as he's also looking for the one-armed man, and Gerard is looking at him. But it's not the insurance companies covering up a bad deal. It's not a revenge picture.
Right.
And not a mystery.
Right.
But when he's saved enough lives at a certain point, he's going to forgive himself.
Right.
And he can, you know, there's a confrontation action scene with the one-armed man.
It's great talking movies. This is a podcast called There's All Things Alice. We can certainly say it's all things movies. But to bring it back to the name of the podcast, if you could just share with us your first introduction or to Alice in Wonderland, whether it's in pop culture or reading the book or, you know, working with me, I don't know, but
that I remember working with you.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm absolutely sure that I had a previous exposure to it. Whether I read the book, I have a vague idea that I may have read parts. I was an avid reader of books, so I can't imagine that I wouldn't have read it. But, you know, stuff that I read at 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, I might not have understood. I can't remember whether it was a movie or not a movie. I was aware of it.
Yeah, you were aware of it from a Disney, from the Disney movies, or from the books,
if there were a Disney movie. I did read it somewhere along the line, and I don't think I read it at an age where I would understood the comedy of it.
Right.
The satire.
Right. The satire.
The political satire.
Well, one of the things that you brought up early on when I was when we were working on the Looking Glass Wars, in particular the TV show, you did bring up the theme of imagination, and which is, as you know, runs through all my books. But having had this conversation with you, I think it runs through your life as well, in terms of, you know, your desire to tell stories and your commitment to screenwriting, commitment to going to combine your love of that typewriter and writing with movies. Well, that was a fantastic conversation, Kenny. I don't think we can end it there. I really need you to come back. Would you be willing to come back for a part 2 interview?
Oh, certainly. I look forward to it.
Okay,
I
so
can
we're
almost
gonna.
imagine it right now.
I can imagine it as well, as if I've already know what we're going to talk about. Well, thanks. Looking forward to it.